Hello and welcome back. If you are new here, welcome to this e-commerce project with Django. This is part 7. However, if you are new to this series and you wanted just to create a product wish list or favorites list in your application, you can follow this tutorial step by step and implement it within your application. Let's take a look at a preview of what we're going to build in this tutorial. So I've just added one product to our application. We'll be able to log in. So I'm already logged in. I'll be able to go in to the product and then just add it to our wish list. So as soon as I've added it to our wish list, we're going to be utilizing the Django message framework to produce a nice little message here. And then we'll have a link to our wish list. So in the admin area, in our accounts area, we'll add a new feature or add a new area here called my wish list. Looks like we need to line this up a little bit better. And then inside of here, the customer will be able to see all the items that they've added to their wish list. Of course, we've only added one item to our wish list, so we'll be able to now remove it. And there we go. So it's just going to be a simple wish list. So we go back to the product and it will tell us that we've probably removed the item from our wish list. It's just to remind us that we've done that. So we can then go ahead and add it back to our wish list if we wanted to. Of course, we could remove it here and we receive a message here saying that we've removed it. So there's two areas that we can remove where we can remove the product from our wish list. If you are new to this series and you're exploring this application, some of the features, they haven't been disabled, but they've been slightly removed as we build this e-commerce store further. So for example, we can add to the basket still. We've still got the basket features. When you click on checkout, you will have an error. You'll need to set up your API key in order for that kind of page to work properly. So that's one feature that is missing. And in addition to that, we have built the accounts feature. So if you did get that payment feature working, we have the orders system in place, but it's not actually linked up again. So in the earlier tutorials, if you remember, we had linked this all up, and that will come up shortly. We'll deal with that shortly. So we'll iterate over the payment system, shore that up a little bit more, make it a little bit more robust, and then we'll add it back into the system. So let's go ahead now and have a look at some of the features that are included in this tutorial. So we are following a get it working first approach, and then we're iterating over the code as we go further on in this tutorial series. So hopefully that approach works for you. I don't mean to waste your time, but this type of approach works, I think, really well in terms of a learning perspective, because it allows me to introduce other Django tools and facilities that we can utilize, or that you could potentially utilize in this series and in other applications that you might build with Django. So saying that, we will be creating this wish list, but trying to first of all just utilize all the tools that Django provides us, and then in later tutorials we iterate over that, and then we start to introduce, for example, Ajax. So this is a purely Django approach. Just very quickly, the features that are going to be covered in this tutorial, I'm going to be explaining one-to-one database relationships and how Django ORM deals with them. We have a look at the redirect method, the HTTP referrer. So we utilize this and this is a core feature here in order to get this feature working with Django. So we'll press the button, we'll refresh the page. That will allow our views to perform actions and send data back to the front end. And then we'll be able to actually change the front end to react to the user's action. So without Ajax, this is hard to perform this type of action without having to refresh the page. So this is why this is required. So we'll look at utilizing exists in a query so that we can check to see if the user has already added an item to their wish list. So exists will be utilized to produce a true or false result based upon a query that we run on the database. So that will then allow us to determine whether we need to show a message and change the button so that the user knows that they've added the item to their wish list. And then finally, in this tutorial, we will utilize the Django message framework. So I'll give you a simple example of how to implement the message framework. And you saw that in the preview in your Django applications. So I know it's a feature of probably every every tutorial, but we're going to start off by downloading the code so you can skip ahead. If you already know how to download the code and get it started, then please do just skip ahead in the timeline. Have a look at the timeline in the video description. Well, let's go ahead now and download the code. So the link for the code is in the previous tutorial, part 6. That'll take you to our GitHub repository here. These are little things that are out of date. These are just small things that I forget to do. I do apologize. And so let's go down and just download. Of course, you can just pull this down. I'm going to download this, put it in a new folder, extract it, and then open up Visual Studio Code and get started. Okay, so I've downloaded and extracted. Let's just open the folder. It's on my desktop. New folder, start folder. Okay, so control and comma, bring up my terminal, and then let's do a py -m, because we're using a program, the event program, and then let's just start a new virtual environment folder. As per normal, that might take a few seconds. Once you've done that, we need to activate it. I'm using tab here to not have to write everything. So tab, it'll bring up the commands if they're available, or files. So now I've activated. What we're going to need to do is pip install the requirements. So this is all the requirements for our software to work. So pip install. So I'm assuming you've got Python installed, of course. Pip install requirements. There we go. So that didn't work. So if you're familiar to installing requirements, you'll know that you'll need an R flag here for requirements to denote the fact you want to install from a requirements file. There we go. So that should install everything. So I do like to check the code works every time, because there's no point giving you the code if it doesn't work. So that's going to take a couple of seconds. Once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to start this. So we're going to need an image, or we're going to need a product. So let's just take you quickly through how to create a product so we can then add it to our wish list when we build the wish list feature. Right, so let's run this server. Let's go back in. Now I already have a server running, so I need to close that. So back into the home page, there shouldn't be any products. Let's go to the admin, a@a.com, and then admin is the password. And then what we're going to need to do, add a new category. So we're just going to go for shoe, for example. I still haven't added this in to automatically add the slug. So we're going to add a shoe category, and then we're going to go to product type, add product type. It's going to be shoe. And then just add a property, maybe the size of the shoe, for example. So these are just specifications we can add, and there's lots more you can add, of course. So just the size of the shoe, we'll just go for that for now. And then we can add a product. So product type is going to be shoe, category is going to be shoe. Now, if you're new to this series and you're wondering what I'm doing, you can, of course, go back to part 1. I'll take you through how to build all of this, of course. So we're going to need a new shoe. So let's think about a shoe that we can add. Okay, for no particular reason, I'm just going to add a new shoe name. Okay, so we're going to need a slug. So remember, slug is the URL kind of addressable unit that has to have obviously no space. So we need a dash or an underscore. Regular price. Okay, so we've got that in place. Specification, we can use the size of the shoe. So we're only going to be selling size 10, for example. And then we're going to need image. So you're going to find an image. If you go into the project inside of your media folder, there's already some images that you could use. Use the blue one. That seems to be scaled correctly. So I'm just going to add an image there, and then it must be is featured. Otherwise it won't show, remember. So you must have an image that is set to is feature. So that's the feature image, and then press save. And I think we're done there. So let's go back to the store. So we've got our product. We need to click on, not set this up properly, but we need to click on the link here to get to the product page. And there we go. So everything else should be working. So we can add to the basket, view the basket. Obviously the checkout won't work until you've added your own API key. Again, just check out the tutorial, the previous tutorial, if you want to look at how to do that, if you've not already done that. Okay, so now we're ready then to add a new feature. At the moment, the button says add to favorites. So we need to change that to add to wish list at some point, but we're going to be working here first. So let's first of all go into the database schema that we built. If you want to follow this, if you go into the documentation and database schema, I did lose some tables. I do apologize, but I've added these back in. And obviously I didn't save the right version, but this is where you find the data. So the link is up the top here. If you want to utilize this, it's just one of many services like this. If you copy and paste that code in, apart from the top item, the link, into the code editor here, you can build this nice little database schema that we're building. Now let's just zoom in here so you can see what's going on. So you may have seen this before, but what we want to do here is we want to add a new item inside the products table. We're going to call this a new field called users wish list, and we want to build a one-to-one link. Now we're going to use a one-to-one link here, which essentially what we're saying here is that for one product or for one customer, they're going to put an item, a product in their wish list, one item in their wish list. So for one product, they add one item, that one item. So we're building a one-to-one link between customer and product. Now, to generalize here, in database terms, it's not a very good idea to have a one-to-one link between two tables potentially. So what the Django ORM does behind the scenes is it creates a new, what we can refer to as a link table. So in this link table here, this automatically happens when you make a one-to-one table, is that you can see it's going to add the product ID from the product table. That's a foreign key to the product table, and it's going to then add a foreign key from the customer ID table to the product users wishlist table. So this is going to be a link table that's going to be automatically generated by Django, and inside of here is going to detail all the customer IDs against all the product IDs. So anytime a customer adds an item to the wish list, they're going to appear in here against the product ID. So to summarize, we're going to build a one-to-one field, and that's then going to create a new table here, which is going to link the customer and the product table in this linked table here. And this table is going to hold all the data about all the products that the customers have added to their wish list, sorry. So let's open up our project and let's get into the store. So in the store, we have our models, and down here we have our product. So I'm just going to add this to the bottom here underneath the last field. So yeah, we just need to build a one-to-one. Okay, so we're going to call this users wish list. So this is going to be a many-to-many field. And now we just need to bring in the link to the author. So here we're going to, if you remember in our settings, so if you're not new to this project, in our core settings folder, not file, we've broken this up into smaller files. Inside of our base, what we have here at the bottom, we've defined our new custom user model through the auth user model variable here. So we can call this inside of our settings now to build the connection within our model table. So we want to connect or define the fact we're making a many-to-many connection to the users table. So up the top here, first thing that we need to do is just bring in settings so we can access that variable in the settings file. And now we can come back down where we were, somewhere, product image, a bit too far. Apologies, it's horrible when I'm scrolling around. So inside of here, this is where we're going to now put our the link that we want to build to the users table. So that's going to be settings dot and then the name of the variable essentially in the settings. So that was auth user what is it, auth user model. Okay, so that connects to the model. We're going to have a related name, or we can add a related name. Let's just call this something. Let's just call this users wish list, I guess. User wish list. And then finally, we'll just say that it can be blank, so we don't have to have anything in the field. So blank equals true, because customers obviously may not have added anything to their wish list. So that is not a problem if there's nothing inside of that field. Right, so that's the field set up. So we're going to need to go ahead now and just migrate that. Maybe there's a problem there. Let's just double check that. Okay. So let's go ahead and migrate or make migrations. We see that this is the field that we're going to add. And then we're going to obviously migrate that. Okay, and that's been applied. Right, so I have the extension, apologies to keep saying this every time, the SQLite extension. So go ahead and just search and install that if you like. So I can now go into my database here, open up my database, go into the Explorer, and I'll now see, I know it's incredibly small to you. I can now see I've got this new table here. This is the link table that I've just built through going through that process and what I explained earlier. So now I've got this new table created. So now I'm ready to actually start adding items to my wish list. So this is where it'd be useful to get your feedback in terms of what we'd like to see. Would you like me to actually create some UML diagrams, and I'll take you through kind of a workflow of different system components? Are you happy for me just to quickly tell you what's going on? Because here we need to start visualizing, I think, what we're trying to do, because as we go deeper into the system, things will get more complex and we need to create more documentation ideally, and that can be done in the application through just text, for example, or we could potentially go ahead and draw some diagrams to help us understand the flow of the system. So happy to get your feedback there in what potentially you would like me to do when I'm explaining, or potentially if you don't want me to explain the workflow, whether you just want me to actually just start coding straight away and just take you through as I go along, whether you can follow that easily. As we make more complex systems though, that becomes a lot harder for you to follow. So here's a simple workflow of what we're doing. The customer, this is I guess a perspective of the customer, how they're going to work through the system, and that will help us identify what is needed here. So a customer will go to the page, click on the wish list button. So that will then send them off to another page. This is how we're going to work. So we're going to need the URL. So that URL is going to be connected to a view in the background here. So in our view, we basically need to check to see if the item has already been added to their wish list. So we're going to check first of all if the customer has already added an item to the wish list. So doing it this way, we can then basically have the user, whenever they click on that button, we will simply just take them to the same page. So instead of having a feature where they click on a button, it takes them to a different view that adds the item, and then they click on the button again, it takes them to another view, say, to remove the item. We can just put this all into one view, one function. So the customer clicks on the button, we check if the item already exists. If the item already exists, then obviously we just need to remove it. If the item doesn't exist, then we just add it. So we're just going to create an if statement essentially here and add the item if it isn't included in the database, or if the customer hasn't added it, and remove it if they have added it. So all we need to do in the front end is change the button name to appear differently based upon whether the customer has the product already saved in their wish list or not. So there's two things we need to do. We need to build this function here, and the second function we need to build is that when the user goes to the single page, we need to just check to see whether the user has added that item already to their wish list, so that we can change the button when they enter that single product page. So let's go through this. Let's go into the store, and no, we're going to try and do this all in, the account area. So we could do this in the store area. We could think of this as a function of the store. We could look at it in that perspective, or we could also think of this as a function that's part of the user account. So that's the first question. Where do we actually put this code? Or else, do we actually now add a new application here just called wish list? So is that a different approach that we can take? So there's a few approaches here we can think about in terms of where we're actually going to put this code to begin with. So my approach to begin with, I'm going to put this in accounts, simply because in account we've got the dashboard. So the account really is to do with the user logging in and then interacting with the system, so they can change their password, their They can change their details, etc. So I feel as though this is part of the customer experience or customer function or feature. So I'm going to put this in the account. So I'm going to go into the views in the accounts and now start building in here. So with that said, in actual fact, let's start with the URLs because we saw the process starts with the URL. So when the user is going to press that button, they're going to be sent to a URL. That's going to be connected to our view, right? So let's set the bottom here. Let's just add a new path. So I'm going to call this new section wish list so we know what these URLs are referring to. So let's add a new path. Now, first of all, I'm just going to call this wish list. So this is going to be my path. A wish list. So we're going to send them to a new URL called wish list, and inside of there we're going to need a view. So we're going to connect this to a view. So we're going to call this user wish list. That should be views, of course. So we're just going to need a name. Let's just give it a name so then we can refer to this if we need to in the code. And there we go. So that's our first path. So now let's go into our views and connect this up. So we're going to make a new function called user wish list. Now we are still utilizing functions here instead of class-based views. And as I said to someone who mentioned in the comments, we will move this across eventually. This is probably going to be in phase 2, the more advanced phase. When we get to that point, we'll move these potentially into class-based views and make that into a tutorial where I show you how to do that. So now in here, we're going to add our new function. So let's just place it somewhere. Let's just put it up the top. Okay, so just the user needs to be logged in. So let's do a login required. We need to take in the request as per normal because we're going to need some of those details. So now we need to, like I said before, we need to capture what it is that the user's clicked on, right? So that's probably the first thing that we need to do, because we can't actually perform this action until we know what item the user has actually clicked on. So let's just go back into our URLs here. So the question is, do we need to add something here so that, for example, we know what the customer is clicking on? So the answer probably to that is yes. So let's expand this slightly, wish list. And then what we need to do is we're going to need to pass in the ID of the actual product. So we know what product we're dealing with, so we can add that customer to that product ID and add that to their wish list. So let's go for an integer, and we're going to call the variable essentially that we're going to pass over as ID. So we're going to capture the ID of the particular product from the front page, from the front end. So when the user clicks on the button, we're going to pass over the ID of that product so we can then add the user to that product. That's how we know what product the user has clicked on. So here, let's just change this. So this should be add to wish list. Sorry, this makes more sense. So let's add a new view called add to wish list. Okay, so now we've got that in place. Let's go around. Let's start thinking about, how we're going to actually do this. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to capture the ID. So we're going to be passing that ID variable in here. So let's do that. So I guess first thing we need to do is just get the product. So let's just get the object. So we're going to use this get object or 404. So we're going to grab a single item from the database. So this is kind of a shorthand way of selecting an individual product from the database. So product equals get object or 404, and then we want to go into the product table or database, and then we want to collect the product where the ID equals the ID that we passed through from the front end. So now what we have here is we've selected the product that the customer has just clicked on. We've collected that data from a database. Now, we do want data from a different database. It's the product database. So at the moment, this view here is all part of the account. So it doesn't know anything about the product table. So what we're going to need to do is just bring that in. So store.models, so that's from, obviously, from store.models, and then import product. There we go. So if you press save, then nothing, I was going to say nothing happens. So if nothing happens, just click on this Python at the bottom here, click on your scripts. Now if you remember, in a previous tutorial we created the VS Code settings with black. That's all installed, so it automatically formats your code for you. So you can see that when I press save, it automatically formats everything for me. iSort is also included, or we've also installed iSort, which is a different package which sorts out all of our imports. And this is why they're nicely all formatted like this, because that's been automatically done for us. So check out the other tutorials that we have. There's a specific tutorial about black and iSort. You'll find that by just searching black and iSort in the YouTube channel. Okay, so no more self-advertising. Let's get back here. So you can see that I don't have the object, get object or 404, it doesn't look like. Maybe I've not got that. So that should be in the shortcuts here. So notice that when I save, it also puts it into alphabetical order from left to right. It's just helping us find things a lot easier. That's what is happening here. So these are all in alphabetical order. They're sorted into different types of imports. So you've got your local app imports, and then you've got your Django type of imports. So that's now all hooked up. So now I'm getting that data from the database. So now we need to actually now perform a statement. So now we need to check to see if the user has already selected that product, or if it already exists in their if it already exists in the database. So if they've already selected it as an item for their wish list. So post, it's not post, it's product, sorry. Product. God, I'm so familiar using post. Product. So we're going to take this data here. Remember, this data here has selected an item from the database. So we're going to use this now to check to see if the item exists. So in the product table, what do we have? We have a field called user wish list. So what we're doing, we're going inside of this data here, right? We're going inside of this data that we've collected from the database, and we're looking for a field called users wish list. And what we're going to do is we're going to run a filter on that. Okay, so then what we do is we get the ID of the user. We get that from request.user. So that's the user information. So we can go one step further and collect the ID of the user. So when the user makes this request, remember they've got a session essentially open on their client, and they're sending a request, HTTP request, to the server. That's been all passed in here. So this request, all that data is being passed into this view. So I like to think of these as boxes, and we're just passing data into this box. So in order to get to this box, we're sending this request data from the user inside of here. And inside of this request data, we have the user information, and we can then go into that user information and then get their ID. So what we've done now is we've basically gone into this field here, this wish list field from the individual product we've made, and then we've done a filter. So we do have a one-to-one connection here between things, and Django in the background is basically abstracting all the kind of functionality that doesn't make sense here for you potentially. So it's going to that table, that link table that it built for us, and it's looking now for, first of all, it's looking for the item that we selected. So that would be the product ID, and it's trying now to match it against the user ID. So here's the user ID here. So we've got the product ID we're collecting essentially here, and then the user ID here. And now what we can now do is we can check that link table. So this information here is checking that link table to match up those two items, the product ID and the user ID in that table. So we'll see the data in the table shortly. So what we can now do is use the exists. So what we're doing here is we're just checking, we're looking in that link table, we're looking for where the product ID equals say 1 and the user ID equals 1. If that matches, that means that the user has added that product ID 1 to the table, and therefore it exists. So what gets returned here if we use this exists here, what gets returned is true or false. So if it does exist, then if it's true, then we want to remove the item from the database. So we go into the user's wish list. So remember here, post again, sorry, product. It's just ingrained in my head. So we're using this data again, returned from a database, that individual item that we're working with. We go into it again, we go into the user's wish list, and we basically remove it. And that will remove the item from the linked table. Okay, so basically we get the product information, the user information, and then we just basically remove it from a table. So that's now removed the data from a table, and now we can do an else. So basically this will happen if it returns true. So if the product does exist, the user has already added it to their wish list, this is going to run. And then we've got the else. So else if we return false. So if this returns false, then we're going to add it now. So post product dot users wish list dot add. So this is going to add the data now to the this is going to add the data now to the database. Now you may have a question here, and I'm not going to prompt you, but you're probably wondering, because I'm doing something a little bit different here to maybe confuse you a little bit. So if you find it, great. If you don't worry. Messages, we're not doing messages yet, but we could add a message there. We'll do that later. So yeah, there we go. So let's just return. We're going to return a HTTP response redirect. So we're going to bring in this tool here. Right, so what's going to happen now is that the user is going to click on that button, that wish list button. We're going to perform the actions, add it or remove it, and then we're going to send them back to that page. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to get the request data again. Remember, that's the data that's been sent from the user when they click on that button. Inside of there is a whole host of information. What we can do is we can extract, for example, from it the HTTP referrer information. So basically, every time you ever go to a website, anytime you ever go to a website from another website, for example, you click on that link, potentially that information is stored in the HTTP referrer. So the server or the web page that you go to, they can have a look at that information and see where you came from. And a lot of companies or websites will try to collect that information to see where their users are actually coming from to get to their website. And that can be useful information to understand. So that's that information there. So we collect where the user has just come from, and we basically redirect them to it. So let's just make sure we've got the HTTP redirect response. So we've got HTTP response redirect, sorry. Now we need to find the template. All right, so the template, let's remember the accounts template, we have dashboards, etc. But what we want to do is go into the template for the store. Now in the store, we've got the index page, which is the home page, the category page, which shows the items based upon the categories that you've selected, and then the single page. So it's the single page that we need to go into. Now, just one thing that will not be very nice, if you're running, for example, a black application, a black and iSort, and you've also got, where is it? It is prettier. If you've got this installed too, and you press save, it will make some changes to your code, which will be less desirable and will actually break the code. So if you do have Prettier installed, it's well worth just disabling it while you've got Black and iSort running as well. So here we're utilizing Beautify to kind of line up our HTML, because we're using Python and HTML within the single page here. Most of these code, these packages or applications, extensions, sorry, won't work too well. So this is why I'm using Beautify, because it just does what I need to do. Right, so let's go into here, and we need to find the button. That was the favorites button. Let's go back. So first thing that we need to do is just go change this button. So let's go into Bootstrap and have a look. We're using Bootstrap. Still got that going. we're using Bootstrap, so we're going to the docs. Let's search for buttons. So what we want to do is build a button with a link. So if I keep going down to the bottom here, we've got this option here. It looks like what we need. So let's build a button with a link. So I copy that in. So I'll get rid of this button here. And I'll keep that for now because there's some kind of need for that. So we'll add a button in. So we're going to call this button add to wish list. Okay, so that's add to wish list button. Now what I can now do is just style this button because it's the color I want is a light color. I don't want it disabled and I don't want it large. So it's a button, a light button. I think that's all I need to do. Yep. Now I did have a font width of 500, so I'll just follow that too. Okay, so that's my button. So let's just get rid of that one there. So here I can press Ctrl-Shift-P and then use Beautify and then select HTML, and it kind of lines it up for me. So that's that button in place. We don't need this tab index here. Role of a button, and then obviously we're going to need a link. So the link that we're going to need, if you remember, this is going to be a URL, and then we're going to need to go into account. I think it's account, probably account, and then inside of account, let's have a look. So inside of account in our URLs, we've named this user wish list. So here we're just sending them to this path here, to this URL, based upon naming from the app name and then the actual name we've added here. So that refers them to this URL. Okay, you're probably already familiar with that if you've been following this tutorial series. Just for anyone who hasn't. So just a reminder there. So that's then added in there. There are no additional parameters here, or is there? So let's remember that in our URLs, we're actually sending across a parameter as well. So as well as actually sending them to this path, we also need to define this parameter. So let's do that also. So after the speech marks here, we can add our parameter here. So what we need to do here then, we can use doubles or singles, but what we need to do here is pass over the ID. So what's happening here, if you're not familiar with this single page, we pass some data to this template and we pass the data over as product. So because we're sending the product data over, you can already see we've got the ID there. So all we need to do here somewhere, where are we? So we've got the button, here it is. So on line 30. So here we just need to now also send across the product ID. So that just completes that URL. So with that done, in actual fact, we're probably good to go. We can probably do this. So let's go back into our page. I'll just get rid of that. So let's go into a product. So I've added another product here, just for good measure. Now I don't have a server running. So let's just run the server, so there's no code problems. So let's just add this to my wish list. Oh, I messed that up. Okay, so it doesn't look like anything's happened here, but you notice very briefly that the page does reload very quickly. Now I can't remember how many times I've pressed this now, but let's just go back to our code here. Let's just tidy this up. It says add to wish list and then the letter K. So add to wish list. Refresh again. Okay, right. So let's go into our database and have a look. So I've gone into my database here, right click, show tables, and you can see that currently there's nothing inside of this table here. Let's just move this across a bit. So there's currently nothing inside of this table. Right, so let's just press the button again. Let's go back into my table. I'm going to refresh down here, right click and show table, and you can now see ID. So that's just the ID that's referring to the auto incremented ID within this table. So every time I add an item, that will go up 1. Now you can see that I've already added 2 items beforehand and removed them because I'm on ID number 3. So here we got the product ID referring to the product table, product number 2, whatever product number 2 is. That's the thing I've just clicked on. I've got the customer ID, so there's only one user here, which is user 1, and there we go. So now I've added this to my wish list. So that's that item. Let's just go ahead and see if we can add the other item. So this item here, I'm going to add this to my wish list. And let's have a look in the database. We'll just refresh. Right click and show table again. You can now see I've got 2 items in my wish list. 2 customer ID ones, product number 1 and 2. So now what we need to do is just go ahead and do everything else we need to do here. So that's pretty much the functionality all done really. We'll just now add on to that to make it more convenient for the user. Obviously we need to now show the user all their products that they've added to their wish list. So let's go in now to the templates again. In the accounts we have the dashboard. So currently the user is logged in, I believe. In my dashboard I've got 3 items. So I'm going to add a new item here. You saw that in the preview, so that we can then go and click into our wish list. So to do that, let's not make this complicated. So dashboard, for each item you see in that list there in the dashboard, we've got a column, an individual column. So column end. So all I need to do is copy this and paste it one more time. Just make sure you go from the right column to start and end. So I've just added a new column. So if I were now to check this, you can see I've got a new item here, which is just a duplicate of this one, this here. So let's go ahead now and change this. So it's not your address list, it's going to be called wish list, or just your wish list. So let's keep a little bit of text here, view your wish list. Okay, that's that done. So I do have an SVG here, which is on the left hand side. This SVG here, so we're going to need to change that. So let's go into the buttons. Let's go back into Bootstrap in the icons. Let's select an icon. So if I'm just going to find list, for example. So this one, the card checklist, maybe we'll just utilize this. So all I need to do is copy the SVG here, go back into my code and just paste over that. Now it needs to be a certain size. So the size it needs to be was 30 by 30. It's just here, 30 by 30. And you can see it's got some classes here that I need to use as well. So I'm going to copy across these classes here into my SVG first. And then I'm just going to make sure that the height and the width is 30, just to match up with the previous one. And then I can remove the previous. I can Control Shift and P, beautify HTML. Close the gaps, press save, go back, have a look. There we go. Okay, so now I've got that in place. Obviously it doesn't link to where we need to go. So now we need to build a new page for our wish list. Okay, so just a case of asking ourselves what it looks like. So we're basically just going to copy your address page. So there's no need for us to completely rewrite this. So edit address page, I'm going to copy and paste that. I'm now going to call that the wish list, or user wish list. So that's the template, user wish list, maybe users wish list or user wish list. Right, so what I don't need here is the form. Everything else I can save, apart from I don't need this function either. Okay, so I don't need that function. So there we go, everything else can stay the same. Let's just edit the title. So it's going to be called the users wish list. That's the name of the page. Now inside of here, apologies, create, so view and edit wish list. Okay, so that's that. let's just call this manage your wish list. So let's just call this wish list, my wish list, manage your wish list. Okay, so what we need to do now then is we just need to find any items that the user might have and output them. So let's go back now into our view. Right, so we need to build a new URL for this template. I think that's the first thing that we need to do. So let's go into our URLs. This is going to be the URLs for in the accounts. Just close everything down. Gets confusing. So in accounts and then URLs, let's set up a new URL. So I'm just going to call this wish list. So that's going to be the path for the wish list here, and then we'll just call this wish list. Okay, so that's my URL. So it's going to be called wish list, the view. So let's go into now the views and set up my wish list. So let's just copy this. We've just called it wish list. Okay, so what we're going to need to do here then is we're going to need to render out a template. So let's just grab this code here on line 36. So let's return request and then account dashboard, and then it's called wish list. That's the template that we've just created. So in templates, account dashboard, user wish list. Okay, user wish list. Okay, so there's my template sorted. That's why I copied it across. It was a lot quicker. So let's just get rid of all of that there. So what we want to do now is what we want to do now, when the user goes to that page, they want to see their wish list. So obviously we need to, I keep saying obvious, I don't know why I keep saying obviously, apologies. So what we need to do now is to collect the data from the database about the user and their wish list. Right, so products. Let's get some products for them. Product. So this is going to be the product table. Objects. So let's just run a filter, and then we're going to filter the user's wish list field inside of this products table, the user wish list. So let's just double check that. So if you go into, so it gets complicated, into store, into models, let's have a look and see what we called it. We called it users wish list. That was the field that we created. Okay, so right, user wish list, users wish list. Let's just make sure we've done that correctly. So just double check to make sure you've got the right field names. And basically all we're going to do, now what we don't need to do here, we don't need to match up the product and the user. Let's remember, all we need to do is look for where the user has added an item to their wish list. So all we need to do is have a look at that linked table. Remember, all the data is in that linked table. We just need to run through that linked table and find any instance which matches the user. So where users wish list equals, and then that's a request.user. Okay, so there we go. So I'm just going to look through that linked table and just see if the user exists. If they do, then I'm just going to grab that product. So now I know what products the user has added to their wish list. Remember, that's going to return all the product information. Let's just make that clear. That's going to return all the product information. So let's just now send this across to our template. We can call that wish list. Let's refer to it as wish list. And then the product data that we've just collected, will go into there. So that's the data we just collected. So we've now passed that over to the template. So let's go back into our template now. Inside of our account, yep, dashboard, and now the user wish list. So inside of here now we can loop things out, but what we should be able to do now, if we go back and refresh, is go to our wish list. There we go. So that's what's currently in our wish list here. Bizarrely, we're seeing the form. I'm a bit confused at that. Oh, that's because of the link. We need to change the link here. That's a good point. Right, so let's go back into our templates account dashboard. Remember, we're going to go into a dashboard now, and this was what we just copied across. This is the new item, our wish list item here. So let's go in now and change the address. So it's not account addresses, it's going to be account wish list. So that's just going to now send us hopefully to the right address. Now what I did earlier, let's go back into my URLs. So I'm going to go into account URLs, just check my URL. Notice no, it's asking me for an additional parameter. Okay, I think what I've done, the error here is asking me I'm missing one positional requirement or one positional argument ID. And that's what's happening here, is that in my views, you can see I've left the ID, because I've copied it across, I've left this positional argument here. Now it is required. So if I were to add something here like that, and then just refresh again, you can see it's not required anymore because I've set a default value for this parameter. So just remove that because that's not needed. So that takes us to our wish list. Wonderful. Right, so straight away it looks a little bit small. So let's now go back in. I'm going to start from fresh again. So we need to go into our templates, account, dashboard, and now the user wish list. So instead of column 6, it's going to be column 12. That one, nice, make it nice and wide to maximize from our template. And now I just need to loop these out. So anything that is returned from a database, I now just need to loop them out. So what I'm going to use here in Bootstrap, if I go over to components, and then let's have a look for a card, for example. A card is just an element I can use. I basically want to make this type of format here in actual fact. So I just go down, I think it's near the bottom what I need. There's all different formats and how to kind of format this card in different ways. So I want the format that's got the image on the left hand side, this format here. So this is how I'm going to start. I'm going to copy this right here. I'm just going to copy this code and go back in, and that's what I'm going to add. Right, cool. So now I've got that in place. Let's have a look. So I've got the kind of card in place. You can see that it's not scaled all the way across. So that's probably the first thing I need to do. So you can see it uses a column size, max width. So let's just get rid of this max width. That should scale things nicely. There we go. So now I've got the item already scaled across. Let's now add the data from the database. So to do this, let's think about what we need to do first. So I guess the first thing we need to do is start by an if statement, because if there isn't any data that's returned, we want to display a message saying you currently don't have any data in your wish list. So I guess probably that's the best way to start here, right? So now because I'm using Django extension, I can just type in if, and you can see it produces the whole statement start and end, and it leaves me in a space where I can now just type in the data. So that's the name of the data that I'm sending across from the view. So in accounts, views, let's just double check. So you can see I'm passing the product information that I've collected from the database into wish list. That's kind of the new variable name that I'm passing across to the template. So if there is any information in that, so I'm just running if. So that if this is true, if there is data, then I'm going to do something else. I'm going to do something else. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to print out you've got no products. So that's pretty much what I'm going to do. So no products have been added to your wish list yet. So let's give this a go. Refresh. Doesn't work. Good. If wish list else. Oh, because I do have items in my wish list. That's why. That's the why it's not appearing. Do apologize because we've not added that yet. I don't have a remove button yet, so I can't change that for now. But that's going to happen like that. So if you don't have any products, it's going to show you this. So now we need to loop through. So we now need a for. So for product, this is just kind of a placeholder. Every time we loop round, the data is going to go into that product, say variable. Let's call it a variable. So, and this is the data where all the items are being currently stored and passed to the template. So for every item we have that we retrieve from the database that's in our customer wish list, we're going to loop it through. Every time we loop it through, the data is going to go into product, and we can then output something about that product that's currently being looped through. So now what we need to do is bring this in, because remember, every time we add a product, we want to output something. So this is what we're going to output every time we loop through. So now what we need to do is just change this up. So the title, so the doubles. So remember, the data is in product at this point, in this variable called product, every time I loop through. And then I output the title, for example. And then I can also output the description. So these are just, remember, these are just model fields inside of my product table. No relation to this here. Remember, this is just a variable where the data is being stored currently as I loop through. Right, so here I can also add the price. So let's just do that. So I can't remember what that is. So we need to look at the schema. So inside of store models, it was called regular price. Okay, so I should have two items which now will get looped through. There we go. So those are the two items that I've added to my wish list. Cool. Right, so now let's think about adding an image. So what I need to do here, remember, an image, there might be multiple images per product. Remember, so we're going to need to loop through the images and extract out the one that is a feature. Remember, what we want to do is only show initially the feature item all the time, the feature image. So we're going to need a for this. So another loop again, for loop. So for image, so anytime we find an image, we're going to refer to it as image. We're going to the product information. Inside the product information is the product image. Yep, and then we're going to then all. So basically we're going to get all the product images. So that's that done. So what we want to do now is get the image that's featured. So if the image, remember we're passing this data through as image. So for each item that's looped through all the images, each time we look at we can access that item through image. So if image dot is featured, so remember this is going to return false, true or false. So is feature, that's a table field, is feature. So what I'm going to do here is I'm basically saying, as you loop through all the product images that we collected from the database about that particular product, we're going to put it in this image and loop through it. And then we're going to check the data. And then if we find it is a feature, so if that data has got the field checked is featured, field check active. Oh, sorry, in the images here. So we've got is feature. So if that's true, then obviously this is the feature image. So therefore we're going to display it. If it doesn't, it's false, so nothing will happen. So now let's just output the image. I'm just going to copy and paste this in. Let's just expand this. So this is the image. Let's just beautify this so you can see it. So we've got an image here, image fluid, again, bootstrap, dblock, p2, padding 2, width 135. This is just stuff I've added. Responsive image, just an alt tag, you can change that. The src is going to be image. That's when we look through, remember data's in image. And then we get the image and then the URL. So it displays a nice an image here. That would display the image there, sorry. And then we've got the image alt text as well, if you've got that available. Right, so we don't need alt there because we wrote it twice. There we go. So that just outputs that image. I don't think there's anything more to say there. Hopefully that starting to make sense maybe to you. Right, so with that in place, let's have a look. There we go. So that's what we ended up with. Now we're going to add a button here. Remember, the only thing that the user probably needs to do here is to remove an item. That's pretty much all they need to do. So let's add a button here to allow users to remove the item. So let's add a button. Now remember here, we don't have a separate view for adding and removing. We've just got one view. Every time it just flips it from adding to removing it. So let's go into below here. Okay, I'm just going to paste this in. I do apologize for not typing this out. So here, what we've got is a new button. We've got the classes in place. It's going to be a small button SM. So that's just all Bootstrap classes. And here, like you can see, I'm just going to send them across to the wish list. I'm going to add the product ID so we know which one we want to remove. And then the text is just going to be, remove wish list. Simple as that. Right, so with that in place, I refresh. It doesn't work because I probably named this differently. Didn't check this. So add to wish list. Was it wish list? I can't remember now. Let's go back into our accounts. At the top here in our URLs. So it was, what do we name it? User wish list. We should have named it add to wish list, shouldn't we? So anyway, let's use a wish list. So let's go back in and refresh. That's okay now. So let's remove it. Let's remove that. And now it also now says no products have been added to your wish list yet. Okay, so we're definitely now closer to the final product. Let's just test this out. So let's go into store again. Let's add it to our wish list. So this is the problem, isn't it, that we now need to do. We don't know if we've added it or not. We could just keep clicking. There's nothing here that suggests that we've added it or not. So let's focus on that, but we're just going to the account or wish list and it's now added and we can remove it again. Right, so let's now deal with this idea of maybe giving the user some information about whether they have actually added it or not. So this is where we're going to use the Django message framework. So the Django message framework, without giving you a very in-depth introduction here, it's a framework in Django that allows us to display messages. Let's just say that, right? So it gives us a tool to show messages, and we need to do very little, as you might imagine, to kind of hook into this message facility in Django in order to display some messages. So what we want to do, like I did in the preview, is display a nice little message here at the top when the user adds or removes items from their wish list. And that gives the user an idea of what's actually happening or whether the item actually has been added or removed. So to do that, we're going to just close everything down. Right, so where do we need to add this? So let's go into the account and the view. So this is where we added the products, also added to the wish list. So it looks like we're going to need to kind of do something here, because when we return them back to the page, we want to also set up a message so it appears onto their page. So we're going to need to bring in the message tools first. So we're going to hook into the Django message framework. So that's a simple case of going into the contrib messages. That will kind of set things up. So if I put it there, you can see the iSort in action. It's going to put it up the top. Right, so because it's in alphabetical order here, C, 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 H, S, T, U, U. So you can see it's in alphabetical order. Right, so that's messages. So all we need to do now is set up the message that we want to show. So let's go back into, oh, just up the top here, required. So let's just do one for add first. So if the user does add a product, let's show a message. So we go into hook into messages. We want a success message, say. Have a look at the documentation for the different types of messages and how you can work with them, because you can identify whether it's a success or a fail message on the template, for example, and deal with it differently. So we take in the request, and now we just add a message. So added. Let's just concatenate this. So we're going to concatenate because we want the post title. We'll tell the user what item they've added, and then to your wish list. I can't quite decide whether wish list is going to be one word or not. I think it might be because it's going to be a feature. Oh God! Right, so we've now added this message. Yeah. So we've now added this message. We get post. It's not. I'm stuck with post again in my brain. So product. So we get the product title. Remember, we've captured all the product information here. No, sorry, up here. Sorry. We've collected the information here, so that's where we're getting the product information from. Remember, when we go to here, this adding to the product or removing the product, we get the actual product first that we're dealing with. So I just grab that and just output the title there. So that's the message in the back end. That's pretty much how easy it is to utilize the Django message system. So that's going to be also now sent back in with the redirect. So there's no need for us to kind of set up any context here. This is going to be sent back. Now, how this is done, how you might imagine, if you're wondering how this works, if you go into the core and then the settings and then go into your base, you'll find that we already have some kind of applications installed here. And one of them is the Django contrib messages. So behind the scenes, we've already installed the app. So we've already set that up. So everything is already in place for us to actually work with this. In addition to that, we've got the middleware. So this is where the real magic is. And this is how we don't need to worry about the context, passing it in the context, because it's all done for us. Okay, so have a little read of that. Apologies, I'm not going into too much detail there. But that's in simple terms how we're going to set up a simple message. So that will now be sent back. So now let's capture that within our template. So let's go into our templates, account, our store, our single. So inside of here, this is where we're going to click the button. So we want to put our message somewhere in here. So I presume it's going to be, it's going to be added right at the top, which I believe is going to be right here. Oh no, because that's the row. Okay, so we'll add it here. So we need an if statement. So if messages, so we're going to check to see if there's any messages. Yep. So if messages, well, let's do something. So let's just output a div. So we're going to be utilizing a bootstrap alert here. So alert warning is the color. So let's do that. So that just closes that down. Oh, looks like there's a problem there. Okay, so that closes that down. And now what we want to do is collect the messages. So we now need to do a for. So for message in messages. So for each message we're just going to loop it out. Obviously, we've only got one message here. We might have multiple messages. So we're just setting that up in case you wanted to do that. So we can send multiple messages across. So what we want to do now is get the message. Let's use safe. So that's the actual message. That's what the string that we set up in our view. That's what's going to be printed there. And then what we can now do is I'm just going to set up a link to the wish list. So here we go. So it's just going to say the message dash, and then it's going to give a user a link to their wish list so they can go ahead and access their wish list. Now, I haven't checked that. Let's just double check. the wish list. I think it's just wish list, isn't it? Without looking. So let's have a look at that. Let's go into here, let's add to the wish list. And there we go. So added night challenger, blah, 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 to your wish list. And it then takes us to our wish list if we need it. So notice it only appears when I add it. So I clicked on it twice then in order for this to appear. So I click on it again, it disappears because I've removed it. Click on it again, it then adds it again. So we now know when the item is being added to our wish list. Right, so let's go into the view. Apologies, I'm flicking around here. I just want to add a space here. So there's a space on the page. So I've just added some spaces here so that we don't get this error here added. And here there's an error, there's no space. So when I refresh, and now you can now see it's the spaces are now in place. Right, so now that's in place. Let's do the similar thing for when they remove the item. So back in the views here, all we need to do at this point is copy our message across. So this is when the item is removed. So this would just say, let's just go for product title has been removed from your wish list. Okay, so let's give that a go. So has been removed and then added. There we go. So there's some messages there to help you out. So it's obviously removed. Let's add it. Let's go into the wish list and now it's available. So just to finish off then, let's sort this out here. So this is in the dashboard, in the template accounts, and then the dashboard, and then the edit, wish, user wish. Okay, so here we have a column on this side. This is a 4 and 8. Remember, we're using Bootstrap, so we have a 12 column system. So here, let's just go for 2, and this side we go for 10. So that should make the left-hand side column smaller. There we go. So that just tidies that up. I'll just get rid of these rounded corners on the edge. I think you can just about see them. So that's going to be div card here. So we'll just get rid of those rounded edges. Yep. Okay, so now we've got that sorted. So while we're here, I noticed actually on the, if I go into the views here in the accounts, I've noticed some mistakes here. So for example, the user base here, this is referring to a database that doesn't exist yet. So what I'm going to need to do here is bring in, I think, the settings like I did previously. So if I go into the, let's just go into the store and views up the top here, I want to, in the models, you remember I utilized in the model the settings and then accessed the table. So let's just go into the view here. This is the view of the account. So I'm just going to bring in settings here. And then that's going to allow me access to my base model. So what I want to try and do here is access, because although I'm not utilizing this, deleting users, etc., I think there's another mistake here. This is just referring, like I said, to the wrong table. Because when we, if you remember in the previous tutorials, we changed the account model, the user model, to customer. So it's just a simple case we're not using this anymore. So we could bring in from the settings, we could do it that way, or else, and because we're actually in the account here, I suppose we could just go into the models here. We've already got customer right here, so we don't need to go into settings from here. We could just go to the customer and there, and then just down here we've also got user base. So that's the old name that we described the user table. So it's just called customer base. So in the model, we've got the customer. So we've changed that in the view. That just make sure that's working again. If you're wondering why that wasn't working, there's a request here which seems to be undefined. So Not quite sure what's happening there. Okay. Maybe a typo. Okay. Well, there we go. I was just thinking about why I slowed down at the end. I was just thinking about what else to show you, but I just wanted to keep it nice and simple. And I think what we've done there is created a very simple, utilizing Django only, a customer product wish list, utilizing a bit of action. So when the user does perform an action, we do indicate to the user that they have performed an action. Clearly now they have an area in the dashboard now so they can see their product wish list. So in the future, what would be good here to expand? One, potentially we could convert this into Ajax so we don't have to keep refreshing the page. That's one thing that we could do, but we could also expand this wish list because it might be that the customer, for example, the Amazon implementation, they allow users to have a wish list and a shopping list, which is slightly different. So I think the wish list is available to anyone to kind of view. If you want to share it with your friends so they can buy you things, for example, maybe that's something that we might want to include here so other people can see your wish list. And then the shopping list is just a list of items that you potentially want to buy. So slightly different there in terms of the type of features or the function that you might want to include. So maybe that's something we tackle in a later tutorial. But for now, I think as a simple implementation, like I said, I think the wish list is now set. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully that was useful. Any comments, any queries, any problems, any issues, just let me know. And hopefully I'll see you in part 8. Hopefully that won't be too long. I can't quite remember now what we are doing in part 8. So let's just quickly take a look. So if you head over to the channel, you'll see in the community area, I have been communicating with you all in terms of and asking for support. I can't really remember where it is now. So somewhere along here is a list. Here we go. So this is 3 weeks ago. So I detailed and started to get suggestions from you in terms of what to include. Excuse me. What was that? And now I've lost it. 1 month ago, so it's 3 weeks ago. It's up here. Not that one. This one. This one. Apologies. So here you can see the list of what we were kind of running through. So we've tidied up the front end. We've looked at data models. We've done the data models now on the store and in the account. We've had a kind of we've iterated over them, so we've made them a little bit more efficient. So we've added multiple images, so we've done that. We're not basic search. Okay, so this is really up to you whether you want me to add a basic search here. It will be very basic. My intention is in the advanced version is to kind of go into that in a little bit more detail. I can add a basic search. That's something, if you want to learn, just let me know if that's something you're interested in. Tags as well. So tags, so what we can do is add tags to products, for example, and then we can use those tags to search. That will be an add-on that we'll kind of bring in. What I'm trying to do is avoid as many packages, adding as many kind of third-party packages as possible to begin with. So changing to class-based views. So that's probably something also I'll move into the advanced section here. We'll just keep with function-based for now. Sort out the email after payment. So that's another big area now I think we need to potentially move into, sort out the payments, the methods for the payment. We set out a very simplistic method, which wasn't particularly robust. Maybe that's something that we need to now refocus on. Or I mentioned, or you've asked for PayPal to be integrated in. So that's something that we could look at. So internationalization, that's something that we've been including as we've been going through the models. Maybe that's something we can look as a kind of global thing. But these are type of aspects I'm trying to think of and follow a pathway so that we kind of get the basics in place. So that once we start doing internationalization, that's quite a big task that we don't want then to iterate over a section again like we have been doing in a big way and change things, because it just makes more work for us. Custom email settings we can easily do. Maybe some more admin views. Maybe that's something we can have a look at. So the coupon system. So really the coupon system needs to probably be put in place once we've had a look at the accounts. And then at some point, we'll get to a point there needs to be a lot of testing. So you saw the last changes I make there. Really, that should have been captured in testing and is the reason why we should be testing as we go along. Because I've been making such large changes, I felt as though it was almost time wasted. I say that lightly, time wasted setting up all the tests. Okay, so there's not really too many features. I think the biggest thing that we need to do now is sort out the accounts, maybe add PayPal in so we can then kind of make that system a little bit more robust. But the point here is that if you have any suggestions, please just let me know. I'm going to try and move this all over to the Discord channel so you can kind of see this in a space that is a little bit clearer to find and easier to find than trawling through all the community posts here, trawling through the community posts. So I'll make that available soon so you can add suggestions there. So you can see that we are going to get to a point where we're going to move into kind of the second phase, the more advanced phase, and have a look at recommendation systems, caching or cache our system, live chat potentially using channels. That'd be quite a large tutorial. Bulk emailing. Maybe we could set up a mailing list here. In actual fact, that's probably something that we could do. Process and working with images. Okay, that's kind of another kind of third-party packages, kind of managing images, scaling them down, and checking better checks of images when they get uploaded. Just some kind of automation with images so we can scale and fit them in. Just kind of add in performance ultimately. Then at some point we're going to need to move to PostgreSQL. So what we're going to do in the advanced stage, what I'm trying to do here is cover some basic features and functions, and then we get to a point where we need to install Docker, because Docker can be quite an advanced feature. It's not necessarily easy to pick up initially and install, and this way when we're working here we can kind of drop in and out of the system here. Once we start going into Docker and start utilizing Postgres, etc., that kind of locks us in to you have to have followed the previous steps really to get to that point in order to work with this system. So I'm just trying to avoid that as much as possible for now. Okay, so any suggestions, any queries, any problems, please just let me know. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.